What happens when airport security mistakes a Navy SEAL for a security threat? Marcus Williams was about to show them. Dressed in civilian clothes after a long flight from overseas, Marcus looked like any other traveler, except to TSA Agent Tom Bradley, who saw a tall black man in a hoodie and assumed the worst. Bradley's aggressive questioning and illegal search procedures were about to collide with 15 years of military training, top-secret clearance, and a Congressional Medal of Honor. By the time Marcus finished educating Bradley about proper protocol, the TSA would be issuing public apologies and Bradley would be looking for a new job. Denver International Airport's Terminal B was experiencing the usual Tuesday morning rush. Business travelers hurried toward their gates clutching coffee cups and laptops, families struggled with oversized luggage, and the constant hum of announcements echoed through the cavernous space. For most people, the airport was just a necessary inconvenience between where they were and where they needed to be. For Marcus Williams, airports had become a second home over the past 15 years. He'd passed through dozens of them in uniform and out, sometimes carrying orders that would take him to places that didn't exist on public maps, sometimes returning from missions that would never be acknowledged. Today was one of those returns. Marcus stood 6'3" with the kind of calm presence that came from years of training and experience. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen and done things that most people couldn't imagine. His dark skin bore the subtle scars of service, a thin line along his jaw from shrapnel in Afghanistan, slightly crooked fingers from a parachute accident that had been classified as a training exercise. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray hoodie, and worn running shoes. After 18 hours of travel from a location he couldn't name, even to his family, all he wanted was to get through security, catch his connecting flight to San Diego, and sleep in his own bed for the first time in 3 months. Marcus had been part of a classified joint operation that had prevented what intelligence analysts later described as a significant threat to national security. The details would remain buried in files that few people would ever see, but the mission had been successful. More importantly, everyone on his team had come home alive. As he approached the TSA checkpoint, Marcus noticed the usual collection of travelers in various states of preparation and frustration. Some fumbled with laptops and shoes. Others stood impatiently in line checking their phones. It was the kind of ordinary chaos that Marcus found oddly comforting after months of high-stakes precision. That's when he noticed TSA Senior Agent Tom Bradley watching him. Bradley had been working airport security for 12 years, and in his mind, that experience had given him the ability to spot potential problems before they developed. He was 52 years old, slightly overweight, and carried himself with the inflated authority of someone who had found his small corner of power and intended to protect it. To Bradley, Marcus Williams looked wrong. The way he moved with too much confidence, the way he scanned the terminal with eyes that seemed to catalog exits and sightlines, the way he carried himself like someone who thought he belonged everywhere he went. Bradley had seen it before. Young men who thought they could intimidate their way through security, who assumed their size or attitude would get them special treatment. The fact that Marcus was black only confirmed Bradley's suspicion. In 12 years of airport security, Bradley had developed what he considered a reliable profile for trouble, and Marcus fit it perfectly. As Marcus approached the metal detector, Bradley stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside for additional screening." Marcus looked up, his expression neutral. He'd been through this before. Not exactly this, but variations of it. Random selections that weren't random. Additional screenings that happened to focus on travelers who looked like him. Usually he went along quietly, understanding that making a scene would only make things worse. But today was different. Today he was tired, and he just spent 3 months protecting the very freedoms that Bradley was about to violate. "Is there a specific reason for the additional screening?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but clear. Bradley's jaw tightened. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by someone who looked like Marcus. "I don't need a reason, sir. This is routine additional screening. Please step aside." Marcus glanced around the checkpoint. Other passengers were moving through the metal detector without incident. A white businessman in an expensive suit passed through without a second look. A family with crying children was waved through with sympathetic smiles. But the tall black man in casual clothes required additional attention. "Agent Bradley," Marcus said, reading the name tag. "I understand you have procedures to follow, but I'd like to know what prompted this selection." Bradley's face reddened slightly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but making sure other passengers could hear. "Sir, you can either cooperate with security procedures, or we can discuss this with airport police. What's it going to be?" Marcus felt the familiar calm that came before action. It was the same feeling he'd experienced before every mission, the moment when training kicked in and emotion stepped aside. He could see Bradley's strategy, intimidation backed by implied authority. He could also see the other passengers beginning to watch, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "I'm happy to cooperate with legitimate security procedures," Marcus said evenly. "I'm asking about the basis for this particular procedure." Bradley was done with questions. He turned to his colleague, Agent Sarah Chen, who was monitoring the X-ray machine. "Sarah, call for additional support. We have an uncooperative passenger." Agent Chen looked up, noting the calm tone in Marcus's voice and his non-threatening posture. Something about Bradley's request didn't feel right, but she reached for her radio anyway. That's when Marcus made his decision. He reached slowly into his pocket, moving deliberately to avoid any sudden motions that might be misinterpreted. "Agent Bradley, I think you should check my credentials before this goes any further." Bradley scoffed. "I don't care what kind of ID you have, sir. You're going to submit to additional screening or—" Marcus pulled out a leather wallet and opened it to reveal a military identification card, but not the standard issue that most service members carry. This was different, a special operations card with security clearances marked in codes that most people wouldn't recognize. But Bradley wasn't looking at the codes, he was looking at the words United States Navy and the rank insignia. "Your military?" Bradley asked, his tone shifting slightly. "Navy," Marcus replied. "Special operations. I'm returning from a deployment." Bradley examined the ID more closely. The photo matched, the holographic security features were legitimate, and the clearance codes were unlike anything he'd seen before. But his pride was already committed to this confrontation, and backing down now would look like weakness. "Military ID doesn't exempt you from security screening," Bradley said, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "You're absolutely right," Marcus agreed, "but it should exempt me from racial profiling." The words hung in the air between them. Other passengers had stopped to watch now, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming more than a routine screening. Agent Chen had paused with her radio in her hand, recognizing that this situation was escalating beyond normal procedures. Bradley's face flushed deeper. "This has nothing to do with race. This is about security protocols." Marcus nodded toward the other passengers flowing through the checkpoint. "Agent Bradley, in the last 5 minutes you've processed approximately 30 passengers. Can you tell me what criteria you used to select me for additional screening?" Bradley opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He couldn't articulate a reason that wouldn't sound exactly like what Marcus was implying. That's when Airport Police Officer Janet Rodriguez approached. She'd been monitoring the situation from her position near the checkpoint and had noticed the growing crowd of onlookers. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran who had learned to read situations quickly, and what she saw was a calm, cooperative traveler being harassed by a TSA agent who appeared to be out of his depth. "Is there a problem here?" Rodriguez asked, directing her question to both men but focusing on Bradley. "This passenger is refusing to comply with additional screening procedures," Bradley said quickly. Marcus looked at Officer Rodriguez and spoke in the same calm tone he'd maintained throughout the encounter. "Officer, I've offered to comply with all legitimate security procedures. I've shown Agent Bradley my military ID and explained that I'm returning from deployment. I've asked for the specific reason I was selected for additional screening, and I haven't received an answer." Rodriguez examined Marcus's military ID, noting the Special Operations designation and security clearances. She'd seen enough military IDs to recognize that this was someone with significant credentials. She also noticed the small crowd of passengers recording the interaction on their phones. "Agent Bradley," Rodriguez said carefully, "what was the specific trigger for additional screening?" Bradley realized he was trapped. He couldn't admit that his selection had been based on profiling, but he couldn't provide any legitimate security reason either. It was a random selection. "Random?" Marcus asked quietly. "You said it was routine. Now you're saying it was random. Which is it?" Before Bradley could answer, Agent Chen approached with a printout from her computer terminal. "Agent Bradley, I ran his ID through the system. This man has top-secret clearance with special access programs. He's cleared at levels above our pay grade." Bradley stared at the printout, seeing security classifications he didn't understand, and clearance levels that were far beyond anything he dealt with in normal airport operations. He was beginning to realize that he had picked a fight with someone who could probably have him fired with a phone call. Marcus took the opportunity to explain, his voice carrying clearly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Agent Bradley, I've been serving my country for 15 years. I've completed multiple combat deployments in classified operations. I hold a Congressional Medal of Honor and 3 Purple Hearts. I'm returning from a mission that I can't discuss, in service of a country that guarantees equal protection under the law." He paused, letting that sink in, then continued. "When you single me out for additional screening without cause, when you refuse to explain your criteria, when you threaten me with police action for asking legitimate questions, you're not protecting airport security. You're violating the very principles I've spent my career defending." The crowd had grown larger now, and phones were recording from multiple angles. What had started as a routine morning at Denver International was about to become a viral moment that would force a national conversation about respect, service, and the treatment of American heroes. Officer Rodriguez could see that this situation needed immediate de-escalation. She'd dealt with enough TSA oversteps to recognize one, and she'd worked with enough military personnel to understand that Marcus Williams was not someone to be taken lightly. "Agent Bradley," Rodriguez said firmly, "I need you to step back and let me handle this." Bradley's pride was still fighting against the growing evidence that he'd made a serious mistake. "Officer Rodriguez, I have authority over this checkpoint, and Agent Bradley," Rodriguez interrupted, "you need to understand who you're dealing with here." She turned to Marcus, who was watching the interaction with the patient calm of someone who had been in far more dangerous situations. "Sir, I apologize for this confusion. Thank you for your service. Could you please follow standard screening procedures so we can get you on your way?" Marcus nodded. "Of course, Officer Rodriguez. I never had any problem with following proper procedures." As Marcus removed his shoes and placed his bag on the conveyor belt, Agent Chen monitored the X-ray screen. That's when she saw something that made her pause. "Officer Rodriguez," Chen called quietly, "could you look at this?" Rodriguez approached the X-ray monitor and saw what Chen was pointing to. Inside Marcus's carry-on bag was what appeared to be a metal case and several official-looking documents. "Sir," Rodriguez asked Marcus, "would you mind if we examine the items in the metal case?" Marcus nodded. "Of course." When they opened the case, both Rodriguez and Chen stared in silence. Inside was a Congressional Medal of Honor, 3 Purple Hearts, a bronze star with V device, and several other decorations that represented the highest levels of military service and sacrifice. The effect on the crowd was immediate. The passengers who had been recording began to understand exactly who they were watching. This wasn't just any traveler being harassed. This was a genuine American hero, someone who had risked his life repeatedly in service to his country. Bradley, who had been standing to the side trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, approached Officer Rodriguez. "Look, maybe we can just Agent Bradley," Rodriguez said without looking at him. "You need to write a report explaining your selection criteria for this screening." "I'll be filing my own report about this incident." Marcus had been watching the interaction with growing understanding. He'd seen enough institutional bias to recognize it, but he'd also learned that education was often more effective than confrontation. "Agent Bradley," Marcus said, drawing the man's attention. "Can I ask you something?" Bradley nodded reluctantly. "In your 12 years of airport security, How many Congressional Medal of Honor recipients have you screened? Bradley shifted uncomfortably. I we don't usually ask about that. How many combat veterans? I don't know that either. Marcus nodded. How many people have you served with in life or death situations? Bradley was quiet. Agent Bradley, I'm not angry with you, but I want you to understand something. Every person who passes through this checkpoint has a story. Some of them have served their country. Some of them have sacrificed for their families. Some of them have overcome challenges you can't imagine. When you make assumptions based on appearance, when you let bias guide your decisions, you miss the opportunity to meet some extraordinary people. Marcus picked up his medal case and closed it carefully. I've served with people of every race, every background, every economic level. The only thing that mattered was whether they could be trusted when everything was on the line. That's a lesson that applies outside the military too. Bradley was quiet for a long moment. The crowd of passengers had grown silent, listening to every word. Sir, Bradley said finally, I apologize. You're right. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made. Marcus extended his hand. Thank you, Agent Bradley. That takes character. As they shook hands, Officer Rodriguez made an announcement to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams, a decorated Navy SEAL returning from deployment in service to our country. I think we can all agree he deserves our thanks, not harassment. Applause started slowly, then built as passengers realized they were witnessing something special. Not just the recognition of a military hero, but a moment of genuine understanding between two people who had found common ground despite their differences. As Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to continue to his gate, a young girl approached with her mother. Excuse me, the girl said shyly. Are you really a hero? Marcus knelt down to her level. No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who was lucky enough to serve with real heroes. They're the ones who didn't come home. The girl's mother had tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Marcus nodded and stood, shouldering his bag. As he walked toward his gate, he could hear Agent Bradley talking to Officer Rodriguez. I need to think about how I do this job, Bradley was saying. That man could have destroyed my career with a phone call, but instead he treated me with more respect than I showed him. 6 months later, TSA Agent Tom Bradley was promoted to training supervisor, where he developed new protocols for respectful passenger interaction and bias recognition. His first lecture to new agents always began with the same story. The day he learned that heroism doesn't announce itself, and that the most dangerous assumption is thinking you know someone's story based on how they look. Marcus Williams continued his naval career for 3 more years before retiring to work with veteran support organizations. He never spoke publicly about the airport incident, but the video of his interaction with Agent Bradley became required viewing in sensitivity training programs across the federal government. The lesson of that Tuesday morning in Denver wasn't just about one man's service or one agent's assumption. It was about the fundamental truth that respect and dignity are not earned by credentials or demonstrated by uniforms. They are owed to every person in every interaction as a basic human right. What happened at Denver International Airport that day sparked conversations far beyond the terminal walls. The video footage, captured by multiple passengers, spread across social media platforms within hours. Military advocacy groups shared it as an example of the challenges faced by veterans returning home. Civil rights organizations used it to highlight the persistence of racial profiling in American institutions. Training academies began incorporating it into their curriculum as a case study in de-escalation and bias recognition. Marcus Williams received hundreds of messages from fellow service members who had experienced similar incidents. Many shared their own stories of being questioned, detained, or harassed despite their military credentials. The pattern was clear. Even those who had sacrificed the most for their country were not immune to the prejudices that plagued American society. But perhaps more importantly, the incident led to concrete changes. The Transportation Security Administration launched a comprehensive review of their screening procedures, with particular focus on bias prevention and veteran recognition protocol. Airport police departments across the country updated their training programs to better identify and respect military personnel, regardless of their attire or appearance. Agent Bradley's transformation became a model for institutional change. His willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and learn from them demonstrated that even deeply ingrained biases could be overcome through education and genuine self-reflection. The training program he developed was eventually adopted by federal agencies nationwide, helping to prevent countless similar incidents. Marcus Williams had spent 15 years defending American values in classified operations around the world. But perhaps his most important mission happened in plain sight, in an airport checkpoint, when he reminded everyone watching that the true strength of a democracy is measured not by how it treats its heroes when they're in uniform, but by how it treats all its citizens when they're just trying to get home. The Congressional Medal of Honor that Marcus carried represented extraordinary courage under fire, but the courage he showed that morning, standing firm for his dignity while treating his accuser with respect, may have been even more extraordinary. It was the kind of courage that changes minds, opens hearts, and makes the country he'd served a little bit better for everyone. In a world that often seems divided by fear and misunderstanding, Marcus Williams proved that heroes come in all colors, that service comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with patience, truth, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. If you've ever been judged by your appearance rather than your character, if you've ever felt the sting of assumptions made about you before you spoke a word, then Marcus Williams's story is for you. Because in the end, we are all more than what others see at first glance. We all carry stories of struggle and triumph, service and sacrifice, that deserve to be recognized and respected. The next time you encounter someone who looks different from you, who speaks differently, who carries themselves in a way you don't understand, remember Marcus Williams. Remember that the person standing in front of you might just be someone who has risked everything to protect the freedoms you enjoy every day. And remember that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear hoodies, and they're just trying to catch a flight home.